All right, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam Tagan. I'm a member of the committee. I've kind of been the staff lead, I guess, on this grant program, so I'm going to try and do an introductory and kind of lead us through the agenda. There's no real chairman and vice chairman set up for this committee. We were all appointed, obviously, by the mayor to lead this off. And speaking of the devil,
Good morning.
here.
I'll be right back.
So, but I guess while we're waiting for the mayor, if everyone in the room can kind of introduce themselves, if they're on the committee or just a member of the public. As I stated, I'm Adam Tagan. I live in the city, and I am also the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the city.
Scott Kellogg, Alderperson.
Yeah, Mary Holcamp, Alderman.
Andy Nelson, President.
Keith Wilkes, resident.
Heidi Goodrow, resident.
Nathaniel Shuda for the Daily Tribune.
Jerry Feith, resident.
Sophia Hankey.
Doug Bepke, resident.
So Shell, city attorney.
Clearly, that didn't take long enough, because we still have the mayor. But we will be holding a public hearing today. The purpose of this meeting, and I'll kind of just give an overview of that while we're waiting, but basically for a community development block grant, specifically a public facilities grant, which is what we're proposing to pursue at this time. There is a public participation plan that the city adopted in the past that is followed to make sure that the public is involved in this process. So this meeting was actually noticed 2 weeks ago, and then the notices went out 24 hours prior to this for the actual meeting with committee members. So the purpose of this group is to review what the CDBG grant is about, potential uses for it, identified resources that would be used to fund it on the city side, and looking at basically potential projects that would be utilized, those funds would be utilized for. And then after gathering public input, this committee would then make a recommendation onto the city council on whether or not a grant should be pursued and basically kind of roughly what those funds would be used for. So that's the purpose of this committee. There would be a second stage of this committee as well. In a way, it's almost an oversight committee. So midway through the grant, there would be an additional meeting to make sure that things are on track, that originally what we set aside the funds for is being followed. So basically, that's kind of where this would go. There may be additional meetings depending on where the mayor would like us to meet and go with this. Whether or not there would be some kind of preliminary settings if we do get the grant as to what priority areas would be looked at or something like that. So there may be more involvement, but by our plan, there's really 2 required meetings, this one and then kind of the midway oversight one. So just so that all the committee members understand what you're getting yourselves into. So that's where we sit. And then I'll hand it over to the mayor so he can.
Have you called it to order?
Officially, I don't know that I did.
You did.
I did.
Okay. So since this is a newly appointed group again, we want to officially elect somebody to run the meeting. I should say officially elect. Just have someone run the meeting. I deflect to Adam, would be a fine individual to run the meeting unless someone else would like to run the meeting. But that would be one of the first things we want to accomplish today. As a reminder, and I don't know if Adam mentioned, but this was first noticed in the newspaper back in August 29th, was it? Or Thursday, August 29th. So it wasn't something that we noticed yesterday and it came out in the paper and all that sort of thing. So it's been out there for about 2 weeks now, and that's actually one of the requirements of the grant application is 14 days. So. With that, anybody disagree with Adam running the meeting? Since he's a member of the committee.
Go for it.
Okay.
All right. With that, I guess we should probably formally open the public hearing for the consideration of the Community Development Block Grant Public Facilities application. And really, my intention was just to run through on the agenda to try and keep things moving. But if there are any sidebars or discussions that need to take place, by all means, let me know. But we'll try and move things along relatively quickly. So first item would be the identification of total potential funds. The public facilities grant, this is through the Department of Administration at the state level. For those of you who are not familiar with the Community Development Block Grant Program, it's a pot of money that's set aside by the federal government through HUD, Housing and Urban Development, which is then given to the states. From the states, they then disperse a large portion of it to what are called entitlement communities. they're generally communities of a certain size. I believe it's 50,000 and over. So they every year get a certain allocation that they can spend on eligible activities. The remainder portion goes to non-entitlement communities, and that's what we are. So we are basically pursuing a portion of that pot of money is what this is for. The maximum grant award is 500,000, and it is a one-to-one match, meaning there has to be, so if the city pursues 500,000, the city has to come up with 500,000 in matching funds. That doesn't have to be all local funds. It could be investment from other people. It could be other non-federal funds. So it could be some state funds. It could be community foundation, whatever it would be to make up that local match. So that is the maximum award, like I said, at 500,000, and that's, I guess, preliminarily what we have set aside. And then only 2% of the award could be used for administration. The rest actually has to go towards the projects identified. So that would be an overview of the total potential funds. Any questions on that?
Where are we looking to get our money from, city? Any ideas?
At this time, the identified one would be reserves, just out of the general tax levy. So we are not probably pursuing any bonding at this point. But depending on how the budget shakes out, there may be that potential. We do have the bonding room to do that if necessary.
Is that gonna be in this year's budget yet or next year's?
It would, at least a portion would have to be identified in the 2014 budget. So that would be next year's budget, not our current budget year. If awarded, the funds have to be spent within 2 years of award, I believe. So you could split it up over the 2014 and the 2015 budget.
Those funds that are allocated, say for our property acquisition fund that we have, if we have money in that, is that designatable for this right here?
Yes.
Okay, so did we,
To be applied, you mean?
to be applied to,
Mhm.
and do we have, did we budget for that
I
this
I
year?
don't know what's sitting there at
I
present.
think 25,000.
25,000 from last year's budget yet.
Okay.
And I think when Adam speaks to a point that bears clarification in terms of using the tax revenues, I mean, that's going to be a question we're all going to get in terms of utilizing for redevelopment purposes. I think the response in general is that all of these investments are going to be very smart. They're going to be very targeted. They're going to be in areas where you look at the CDBG target area map that Adam has presented for all of us. It's got a number of parcels on it that that are identified as vacant, as blighted, or as low use, under use. And frankly, the tax base reflects that we're not generating tax revenues from a lot of these parcels, or as much tax revenues as what we could or should be receiving. So as any smart investment, it has to have a return on it. And I think that's the perspective that I'm leaning on this committee and the council to believe in later this afternoon, is that these investments will generate income for the city and for the tax base in this downtown TIF area.
Any other items on that particular letter A? All right, moving on to eligible CDBG activities. Obviously, being with any grant, especially ones that are federal funds, there are specific things that are eligible and things that are not eligible. This particular grant is available for acquisition of properties, for demolition and clearance of properties, for street construction and expansion, for rehabilitation of structures. A lot of times that's tied towards obviously historic buildings, reconstruction of buildings, creation of new community facilities, architectural barrier removal, and storm sewer projects. So those are the eligible activities. For the most part, engineering and planning is not part of this particular grant. There are other grant funds for that, but this is really meant for actual physical projects. And so those are the eligible activities.
And the engineering and those grants are applicable towards our 500,000 matching.
Engineering, if it was spent by the city, it could be used as our local match, but you cannot spend the grant funds on engineering. Planning activities would have to be basically submitted as a separate application. An example of that was actually our riverfront redevelopment plan that was adopted in 2009, I believe it was. That actually was a CDBG grant, but it was out of a planning grant versus a public facilities grant.
How would the storm sewer come to that?
Well, it's an eligible activity. Whether or not the city would choose to spend any funds on it is the question. Again, it's kind of up to this committee and the council to determine what we would be applying to put those funds towards. At this time, I'm not aware of any specific storm sewer projects that would be targeted, especially within the downtown district. For the most part, storm sewer is covered through our storm water
Yeah.
tax,
Utility.
so, utility.
But I think, there are some paralleling infrastructure, intersecting infrastructure investments that will be done, that are on the list, that have been on the list for a number of years. East Grand is one of them that will have to be reconstructed, and I don't know about the timing of it, when that actually is going to happen. I know we're still waiting for STP urban monies from the state on that. We resubmitted that as a potential late last year, early this year. And then 4th Street, which is just just west of the Hotel Mead, if you drive on that street. Be careful, first of all. But it's another street that I think is scheduled for reconstruction maybe next year. I haven't seen the budget yet, if that's been included in there or not. But there will be a number of reconstructions, I think, that are kind of intersection in terms of the downtown area, just based on nature of the age of that.
All right, moving on, I guess, would be looking at identified public needs. The purpose of that is basically there should be some sort of, I guess, recommendation coming to this committee from staff as to what we identified as potential needs, specifically within the downtown TID. So in looking through that, what we relied upon was the downtown waterfront plan, which you should have hopefully a map. If not, there are extras. So what that does is it identifies potential projects within our downtown waterfront area, which includes the majority of our TID. So looking through there, a logical fit based on what eligible activities are and what the plan is calling for seem to be site acquisition. Because there are many areas identified on the waterfront plan that are underutilized, vacant, basically are just holes in our downtown where there's parking lots, where there should be buildings, or where there's buildings that have lost their usefulness and may be eligible for removal. So the identified need would be going for that acquisition, the clearing of property if necessary, any environmental remediation that would be necessary, and basically have it ready, shovel ready for redevelopment. I guess in my way of thinking, the next logical step after going through this process would then be having chunks of property that are ready for redevelopment and going out with a request for proposals from developers at the state and national level to try and identify someone who would come in and invest in a project that would be consistent with the downtown plan. For the most part, the recommendations in those plans for our downtown area are mixed use. So that would be a lower level office or commercial use with upper story residential. At least in my opinion, if you look at our downtown, one of the main things that's lacking in our downtown area is actually residential. You don't have a lot of upper story residential within our downtown, and that can oftentimes be a catalyst for development in the downtown area because you have that built-in customer base, people who want to be able to walk to food, shopping, entertainment. So those are all things that were outlined by the plan that was actually funded by a CDBG grant. So to me, that was a logical community need to be identified. Comments, suggestions, criticisms?
Well, all that, you're right about the downtown living. If you don't have a customer base downtown, downtown development will fail. You have to have spendable income in close proximity to downtown. People spend the majority of their income right where they live.
Don't we have that plan that Mayor Bach had for downtown along the river, that parking lot?
You're talking about the New Page parking lot?
Yes.
I believe it was a condo project. Yep.
There's a plan out there that we had planned on using with the apartments upstairs above the commercial downstairs.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly the type of development that's called for by our plans and things. And so this grant potentially could be utilized if that parking lot were to be acquired by the city, for example. It could be used for that acquisition and investigation and making sure that obviously there's no contamination
kind
issues
of
or things like that.
Go off of those plans?
And I think that's the point of the CDBG. We've planned and planned and planned and planned ad nauseum, and we haven't acted, right? We haven't taken from the plan stage to the implementation stage. And I think if there's one thing that I hear, it's the city hasn't done enough to act, right? It hasn't done enough to implement certain things. And this is an opportunity for us to partner with individuals, whether they're developers or folks in the community that feel that they want to develop certain parcels of property, for us to be able to leverage those federal dollars, right, to make and to further our impact, as opposed to the city doing it alone. And I'm not advocating for the city to do any of this alone, and that's why you're not seeing any specific project really in front of you. It's more speaking in general terms about the TID area that we've got some cause for concern, whether it's blight or vacancy or underutilization, that the core of the community is significant and we can't ignore it anymore. And it's time for us to draw some attention with partnerships to be able to make the best investment.
So you're looking at mostly property acquisition.
That would be my recommendation, I guess, from a staff, as a city staff member, not necessarily a committee member, that we'd be looking at acquisition and clearance would be the majority of these funds.
Is this private property ownership then in the city's name?
If I could inject something, that's always been my gripe, but the city owning too much property, that's not on a tax roll, and I think we've got an awful lot of it. And it hasn't got any better in recent years. And it's always been my gripe with the city buying up more land. If you don't have a buyer for it, I don't think we should be the buyer.
And that's fair, right? But you'll never have a buyer, you'll never have somebody invest in it if it's contaminated. The last thing somebody wants to do is stick a bunch of money into remediation and cleaning up old contaminated sites, or greenfielding a site. If a building has low use, somebody has to do it. And oftentimes the city is one of those players. Do I advocate the city hanging on to property without a use? No. Andy and I went back and forth during the campaign on the piece around property acquisition and whether or not, what's the appropriate strategy for property acquisition. And I think it bears repeating the fact that we will not hang on to things really without a further use. And that's where Adam talks about the need for requests for proposals and requests for inquiries to determine what are developers interested in. Does it make sense for the city to take the first leap, or the developer to take the second leap then to develop it again?
See, my question is, what is the city doing at this particular time to get rid of some of the property we now own?
Adam, can you speak to the last year when we met, going through and identifying a map essentially like this of all the city-owned property?
And we did go through every city-owned property and determine what properties are actually owned for a reason. It's a future well site, it's a future fire station, whatever it may be. And I put those aside, and then we identified properties that are sitting out there that the city does not need, that are able to be sold, or the ones that are kind of possible properties. So we have gone through and we've identified what to do with those properties. We're still haven't made the next step of going out and figuring out how to actively market those properties to try and dispose of those properties. But that is an ongoing planning process, I guess you could say, of trying to get rid of those. And then to further address your point, I guess the main difference in my mind is from city-owned properties that have just been acquired over the years for no particular rhyme or reason, or they were excess right-of-way parcels or something like that tied to an infrastructure project. This acquisition, I guess, is targeted, it's defined, it's for a specific purpose. There's an end game up front, whereas a lot of times those other properties there isn't. So the goal is to say, all right, if we're going to identify this particular block or this particular building, we're acquiring it with the intention of turning around and getting it developed and back onto the tax rolls. It's not just acquisition for acquisition's sake.
And I think we've got an example coming, City Council on Tuesday. Mike Zerflu is interested in acquiring a bunch of excess right-of-way that we've identified that we have no need to hang on to anymore. And it's along the expressway corridor. There's a bunch of extra right-of-way that we don't need anymore that we're looking at turning right back to the adjacent landowner or whoever it might end up being that we purchased it.
Are you recommending acquiring these properties and then developing them, or acquiring them and then finding somebody to develop them?
Yeah, at this point, I don't think anyone at the city wants to be the developer. It would be definitely acquiring it, getting it ready for development, and then finding a developer.
Okay, just to clarify though, so we're looking to use this grant, right? So 500,000 potentially from the state, right, or the feds?
Right, well,
It's
it's a
filtered
state
through,
program,
correct.
but it's filtered through.
filter through, okay. And then the city would contribute potentially up to $500,000, the matching grant, okay. So then we're looking at acquiring and clearing properties. So my only concern, I kind of agree with, especially in some of these areas, but are developers gonna come in right away and build on this, or are we gonna sit with vacant property for another 10 years
How are
or
we gonna
12
get
years?
developers?
Or how are we going to attract all this? You know, I don't wanna sit there and look at nothing.
It's a very good question,
You know?
a very valid question. I don't think anybody would think it's a foolish question by asking. I think we have a mechanism for the developers agreement process that requires certain things, and one of them could be a timeline. That provided that they meet occupancy, that they are able to fill a certain, if it's mixed use or something, that they're able to sell a certain percentage of it, they are asked to build, right? So there's some mechanisms that we have in the form of a developers agreement to require that from them.
Maybe I missed something somewhere. Does the city have to pay that $500,000 back to the feds then, eventually?
It's a grant, not a loan.
Okay.
There would be the possibility of getting that money back, obviously, with the sale of the property to developers, if that's the route that's chosen.
From the city's investment in it
Right,
back.
city getting it back.
Other speakers.
Yeah, because actually next stage is input from the public on community
Hold on, I
needs.
can wait.
So,
I can wait.
just the one quick thing I'll mention, and then the other map that was provided, looking at community need, one of the areas I guess we're targeting is when we declared TID number 7, it was determined to be a blighted TID. That's basically how it was determined and set up. In addition, there are certain federal standards you have to meet for this grant application, meaning 25% of the properties have to meet one of 5 factors, and those are the 5 factors identified on this plan. And based on the analysis that was performed, approximately 30% of the properties within this downtown TID meet one of those 5 factors, whether it's property value, devaluation, whether it's abandonment, vacancy, those type of things. So I think from that perspective, it's pretty clear that there's something that needs to be done in this particular area of the downtown and the near downtown. Sitting back and just letting private development doesn't seem to be working at this point. So I think that's why there's that push to, although the city doesn't want to do this, it may be necessary to get some development rolling. So that would be the final thing I would have on that point. Anything else from the committee before we open it up to public input on community needs? Seeing none, anyone would like to speak? I believe, Jerry, you had some comments?
Yeah, I guess you've just approached the subject in your final comments there. Essentially, what you're saying is that so far it hasn't happened.
Correct.
So the city buys property, clears it, prepares it. What's the incentive? Why would a developer come in now when the property is already pretty expensive and could be, had?
The main thing generally is going to be tied to, you can make the cost of land even cheaper by the city acquiring it and using grant funds for it. Number 2, you're getting it site ready as well. And you are basically assembling the properties as well, as opposed to a developer having to come in and negotiate with potentially 5 different landowners to get a piece of property that's large enough to develop. If the city goes in and does that dirty work, for lack of a better way of looking at it, then they can have a cohesive piece of property that has been identified as being clean. It's at a reasonable price. We can, through a developer's agreement and it being in a TID, there are certain incentives that can be put together as well to make it even more attractive, whether it's tax credits, rebates, those type of things. But again, it's doing a lot of that dirty work that makes it very attractive to developers, and that's how it's been done in communities throughout the state.
Just as a follow-up, have any local developers expressed any interest?
At this point, not to my knowledge.
Nothing solid. I think it depends, Jerry, in the particular area and maybe what their scope is. I think we find with local developers, even on the planning commission, it's what's their capacity and what's their scope of work. I think they might have interest in smaller pieces and smaller projects potentially, but nothing of any large scale.
I think another part of it is that it's my understanding that it's the city, if the city owned land or was in control of land, the monies for environmental remediation are more accessible than to a private person. The grants and such that are available to the city. So a developer may be looking at a piece of property that has a lot of problems with it, and it would be cost prohibitive, whereas the city has different phase ones and phase two monies available as a governmental entity to take care of those things versus having the developer do it.
Were you recommending that, like, the first properties we would go after are these ones that are abandonment or like in the red here? Is that kind of your recommendation or no?
No, there is no recommendation on what areas to look at first. That map is more intended just to show the conditions that exist within the downtown.
There's a high-level snapshot, right?
Correct. No, it would likely be either this group or another downtown focus group or someone who would go through and try and identify those target areas of where to specifically spend the funds. But that is not the goal of this particular meeting.
Did you talk a bit about I'm sorry, there's other questions from others that are in the room in terms of the public. Did you speak to the timeline in terms of why the meeting today and that type of thing?
No.
Okay. Do you want to speak a little bit of that? And I can fill in maybe some.
Sure, I can admit my feelings.
That's probably a question that might be lingering. I guess a question, that all of us, why today, why now?
Okay. This source of funds was originally identified earlier this year, and at that time it was a program through the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. They were the pass-through entity for the state. And when they were in charge of the program, there was no specific grant deadline date. You could apply at any time during the course of the year. And since that, in the end of July, the program has transitioned over into the Department of Administration. And when they took hold of the process, they have now put a specific grant deadline date. Unfortunately, staff, in particular me, did not become aware of this deadline until going to an update at the WEDC level. And at that time, when we reported back to the city, it was, do we try and assemble this to get an application in, albeit at a very short, aggressive time frame, or do we wait a full another year? So unfortunately, with that transition and that change of process, that's why we've had to really move things at an aggressive timetable.
And I would add, there's probably more questions than we have answers today. And part of it is because of the timeline. Part of it also deals with the city budget, right? We can't commit city budget funds for 2014 until they're approved and allocated by the council. So why the Department of Administration thought the middle of September was a good time for this application to be due by cities is beyond me. I mean, no city has their budget passed at this point, or no municipality has their budget passed at this point. So, I think that's an important part that I don't know who in Madison made this call, but it's probably not the best call that they made. There's probably many others that are worse, but I think part of it too, we're looking at what's the roadmap for the next 12 calendar months for 14. It's been something that Adam and I have been speaking much about in terms of where's our next move? What's a priority to us in terms of redevelopment across the city? And this happens to be a piece in the core of the city. That if we don't get the application in today for 14 and 15, we're going to be in this position in 14 for 15 and 16. So we all want things to happen fast, not too fast, but on a healthy pace. And I think if we don't get the opportunity or don't get the approval to submit the application and then have a stab at it, we'll never know if we're going to achieve some of these results. So that's really the timing piece. And frankly, I wish it would have happened sometime next year and maybe the latter part of next year, middle part of next year. But it's what it is. It's a timeline that's been presented to us, and we're just reacting. In this case, reacting. I'd like to say being proactive, but being somewhat reactive in this case to the opportunity.
Two questions then. Do you have any idea how many cities are applying for it now in the state?
We don't have any idea of the actual application piece, but Adam can speak to the breakdown a little bit of how the DOA looks at how they're there's also a scoring criteria. I don't know if you talked about that at all yet. there's a scoring criteria that they must apply, so it's not just, oh, Rapids looks better than X community. There's a bunch of scoring criteria that must be met. We're shy of the low to moderate income status that the HUD designates communities. We're just under 50%. If they're using current numbers as opposed to the census data, our gut is, and they've told us that we'd probably qualify under the low to moderate income designation. But Adam can speak to some of the pieces there.
The other question I had is that application has to be in by 5 o'clock today?
5 p.m. today, postmarked 5 p.m. Postmarked at the post office.
So
They
nobody
changed it. It
doesn't
used
have
to be 5
hand carry in
p.m.
there.
It used to be hand turned in at 5 p.m. The new application, they revised it late August 29th or something, that it can be postmarked. Which I guess, why would they want everyone to drive down to Madison to deliver the applications? It's beyond me.
I was looking forward to a road trip.
But get it approved.
Yes, on the funding side, because it is a HUD federal funds, they set up how the states can allocate the money. 80% of all the funds that are set aside for non-entitlement communities have to be spent on LMI objectives, that's low to moderate income. We are not pursuing that particular section because, again, our community is just on the cusp, which is good or bad, depends how you look at it. So we are looking at a smaller pot of money so it may be more competitive than if we were going through the LMI process. And the scoring for it, basically they look at 5 different factors. They look at, is it meeting a low to moderate income national objective? Obviously there we're probably not going to score very well, although in our application we would still be identifying what our current percentage is, which would be obviously showing that we're very close to that number. Severity of the problem, that's again identifying what is trying to be identified on the map and some of the other data that shows how our community has been going through a lot of struggles, specifically since 2000. So they're looking at that. They're looking at financial need. So they're looking at what is our bonding authority, what is the current number of outstanding bonds that are out there. So what is our financial capability to do this basically without the grant. Then looking at community distress. So they're looking at 3 main factors. They're looking at the median household income, the per capita property value, and the property tax rate of the community. All of those we score, I feel we're pretty competitive on those. We unfortunately have a relatively low median household income, and our per capita property value is relatively low as well, meaning that it's showing that there's a greater need for this type of grant. And then the last thing is planning and collaboration. So showing that this is not just a standalone program, that there are other plans that support it, that there are other funds being spent in the area to help support this. So things like the First Street roundabout that's being done right now, the reconstruction of West Grand, the future reconstruction of East Grand, all those things really play into showing that this is not just a standalone program for a downtown.
When do they plan on allocating or approving the grants?
They claim, now it's a state, so you never know when for sure, but they claim the week of October 28th, the funding decisions will be made.
Should be a great thing for budget. We won't have the city budget quite passed yet. So if we were awarded and we want to subsequently fund something for next year, it'd be great timing for us.
That's good turnaround.
Yeah, it
They
is
can plan.
surprisingly good turnaround.
Right.
But they got a criteria. We saw what happened with the criteria for the student information system with Skyward and all that. Hopefully there's no debacle here with the scoring, but no, I think it's pretty straightforward. One of the areas where we probably won't score as high as we'd like is in debt. Thankfully, we have a very healthy reserve fund balance and we're financially very strong. And so we're not going to score as high as some communities that might have some more fiscal challenges than we have.
You put in your narrative the amount of planning. We're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people putting a lot of time and a lot of effort. Do they give a narrative for that? It seems to me if you have 2 cities or several cities, this city has done enough initiative to merit maybe rather than others. Do they?
Yeah, you're allowed basically 1 page to put together your needs statement. So you have to try and put in all the information on the stats and figures of what our community is facing as well as what has been done in the past for planning and things like that. Obviously we note then that we have the waterfront plan, we have our comprehensive plan, we have our TID plan. So, those are 3 specific plans that have all been done in the last decade specific to this area almost. So yes, that's all something that we would be trying to focus on.
That should be decent.
Yep, and obviously the
One
CD
page, I mean, it's
I know.
12-point font, but I think there's some supporting document areas where we can include some of this stuff, the passage of the TID back in, 2005 under Mayor Bach, and those pieces can be supported as supporting information, but, yeah, hard to make your case in one page.
Yeah.
I mean, to a bunch of evaluators, and that's where the scoring criteria is gonna be important, I think, for their decision.
Other comments from the public on community development needs?
I'm curious if there's any reaction, and we've got questions. Is there a reaction from any of the folks in the room in terms of, we recognize we've been very forthright in terms of the timing and all that sort of thing in the planning that's gone associated with this piece, but curious to know reaction. What's on mind? If you care to share it today or even after the meeting, it's fine too. I'm just curious.
I guess I took the initiative to come to the meeting today, so I might as well speak out, but
Thank you.
I think what's very disappointing to me is that we set up all these TIF or TID districts, whatever you want to call them, and we've never done nothing with none of them. And each one of them, I think, was in the neighborhood of 25,000 we spent. And every day or every week, I look at this pamphlet I got laying purposely in my garage that I can read. And I'm looking and I see half of the book is empty blank pages because we did absolutely nothing. $25,000 and we did absolutely nothing.
And I wouldn't disagree with you. And that's obviously why, there's definitely courage and all that goes associated with getting the application stage and being very public about that. And I think the community can agree that it's time for some action, right? I mean, we thought, and Scott's alluded to, we're standing on the shoulders of decades, really, of people since the 80s of us doing some planning. And I found it ironic today in the newspaper, Earl Garber's commentary about Mayor Penza's initiatives back, dating back when he was mayor. And we're seeing the opposite ends of the spectrum now, right, with the vacancy at the mall and other sorts of things. So it's time for us to take the next leap and to build that next era of development. And I think, this is one of the pieces of the areas of the community. It's not the only place we're going to be focusing attention on, but this is one of those areas that if we can leverage federal dollars, we're all federal taxpayers. And if they're going to go to some community in some state, in some part of the state, and why not make it Wisconsin Rapids? Others feedback for us?
I think the other part is that the notice from a couple weeks ago did provide for that if the public wished to make comment directly to the city,
Right.
that they could, and I don't believe that
We didn't receive any
anything was
correspondence, right.
received on that.
Well, honestly, I think we have covered the last couple items because I have a tendency to talk too much. So I did already target what we would be using the funds for. And again, that would be mainly targeted towards property acquisition and clearing. A very rough preliminary budget has about the majority, about $750,000 going towards the acquisition and the clearing, some amount for environmental remediation because that is an eligible cost as well. The city does have grant funds that would cover the investigation for brownfields, but the actual cleanup, we do not have funds specifically set aside right at this point. So utilizing the grant for that would, in my mind, I guess, make sense so that we can truly get to that shovel-ready stage for these properties. And then a small amount, I think the 2% for administration. So any questions on the very rough idea of what to use those funds for?
Now, do we say, I know we said $500,000 matching, but do you have to put in a specific amount or do you put 500,000 matching? What are we asking for in dollars?
I guess we would be, at least the recommendation thus far has been to pursue the full amount of 500,000 from the grant program with the 500,000 matching from the city.
And you're looking for a recommendation from this body to send this to council, and then you're gonna get a vote from quorum of council members and get this postmarked today.
That's the goal. Yes. That would be after the public hearing is closed, we would then have consideration of making that recommendation. So with that, do we have any other either comments from the public or from the committee before we close the public hearing and move into potential action.
I'd say you can't win if you don't apply. And the other piece I'd say is we don't have to spend any of the money should we become awarded, right? If it doesn't make sense, we don't do it. But given the timeline of application and all that sort of thing, I think it does us due diligence and justice to apply. That's my 2 cents. And I'm not a member of the committee, so I just happen to be.
Jerry?
Yeah, no comment. I just was curious as to whether there are follow-up grants then? Are there, or is this it? You know, you get the block grant and then that's it?
By follow-up, you mean other programs that we could pursue for like a construction project or something like that?
No, I mean, if you get the grant, you have a target for it, you spend the money, then are there other grants that follow up?
Yeah, you just cannot be awarded more than one grant every 12 months. So we would have to basically spend these funds and then we could apply for the same program again
So it
if
is
there was
important.
additional.
It is important to get started early, then you can follow up and you can, your opportunities are greater if you go early.
Exactly.
And I would make another comment too regarding the municipal match. I think our work as people in the community starts in terms of being advocates for not only this process, but also finding other partners and anybody that has financial resources, whether they're or ideas, all that sort of thing. I think we all can be better served if we can minimize the dollars that are going to come from the city, because obviously resources are tight, priorities are high. The list of priorities is long, I should say. And so if we can minimize that investment, but yet still achieve goals that we're looking to achieve, I think that's where our work begins as well, following this committee meeting here.
Last call. All right, with that, I will close the public hearing for the consideration of the block grant. Then that would move us to item 2, which would be consideration of a recommendation to City Council regarding a community development block grant public facilities application.
Are you looking for a motion then?
Yes.
I would make a motion to pass this on to the city council for the full $500,000 block grant award.
I'll second.
I agree. It's like a third.
Okay, we have a motion to support pursuing a community development block grant public facilities application at the total amount of $500,000. With a second, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Same sign, none? Okay, with that, we have a recommendation that will move on to a special council meeting that is being held at 1:30 this afternoon, if anyone is interested and would like to attend that meeting as well. So with that, they will consider this recommendation, act on that recommendation, and then they would also have on their agenda an authorizing resolution that is part of the paperwork as well. So that would be the next step in this process.
Have we talked to any council members other than the 2 present? Are they aware of some of the details of this or no?
Almost to the detail you were when you were coming into this meeting today. There was some information that was shared with them. I believe the clerk emailed them, and I spoke to them individually, some of them, I should say, not all of them yet. Obviously, the 2 here, we'll have 6 at the meeting today. Hopefully, we have our quorum and meet our quorums.
Yeah, basically just a broad brush overview of the timing of what the grant is for, what we preliminarily had identified, and the timing issues. So that was basically what was provided at this point. So with that, not having any other items, I would thank you all for being able to attend on such short notice and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.